Once upon a time, in a beautiful kingdom surrounded by forests, streams, and rolling hills, there lived a young princess named Hildegard. She was kind, beautiful, and beloved by everyone in the kingdom. Her most treasured possession was a golden ball, a gift from her mother, the queen. The golden ball sparkled in the sunlight and was a perfect size for the princess to toss in the air and catch again. But most of all, it was her source of joy and comfort whenever she felt lonely. Every day, after finishing her royal duties, Princess Hildegard would go to the castle's gardens, where she would play with her golden ball by the edge of a deep, dark pond. The pond was known to be magical, said to be the home of mysterious creatures who lived beneath its still waters. The princess, however, was so enchanted by the golden ball that she never paid much attention to the pond's dark depths. One sunny afternoon, as the princess tossed the ball high in the air, a gust of wind came out of nowhere, and the ball flew out of her hands. It soared far across the garden and landed with a soft splash right in the middle of the pond. Hildegard gasped in horror and ran to the edge of the pond, looking at her precious ball sinking slowly beneath the murky water. "Oh no! My beautiful golden ball," she cried, feeling the sting of disappointment in her heart. Just as she was about to turn away in despair, a voice suddenly called out from the depths of the pond. "Why are you so upset, Your Highness?" The princess stopped and looked around, startled. She had never heard anyone speak from the pond before. "Who's there?" she asked, her voice shaking with surprise. From the water, a large, green frog emerged, its round eyes blinking up at her. The frog's voice was low but clear. "I am the creature you have disturbed," said the frog. "You have dropped something precious into my home." Princess Hildegard looked down in confusion and asked, "But you're a frog. How can you help me get my ball back?" The frog swam up closer to the edge of the pond and replied, "I can help you, but I ask for something in return." The princess was puzzled. "What do you want in exchange for my ball?" The frog raised his head and said, "If you promise to let me come into the castle, sit at your table, eat from your plate, and sleep in your bed, I will return your ball to you." The princess was taken aback. She had never heard of such a strange request, and she hesitated. "What do you mean? You are a frog. How could you possibly be a companion to me, a princess?" The frog's eyes seemed to soften, and he replied, "I promise that I will honor my word. If you grant me this favor, I will return your golden ball and be of service to you in ways you cannot yet imagine." Now, Hildegard was no fool. She didn't believe a frog could be of much use to her, and she thought the creature must be joking. In her mind, the frog was simply asking for an impossible favor, but she was so desperate to get her ball back that she agreed. "All right," she said. "I promise to let you into the castle, to let you eat from my plate and sleep in my bed. But only for today, and only because I need my golden ball." The frog smiled, revealing a set of tiny white teeth. "Your promise is enough," he said. "Wait here." Without another word, The frog dove back into the water. Hildegard, though still uncertain, sat down at the edge of the pond and watched eagerly as the frog disappeared beneath the surface. A few moments later, the frog emerged again, holding the golden ball gently in his mouth. He swam to the edge of the pond and placed the ball at her feet. "There you go, Princess," said the frog, looking up at her expectantly. The princess, overjoyed to have her ball back, picked it up and quickly stood up. "Thank you," she said, but her voice held a note of nervousness. "I must go now. It's getting late, and I have other things to do." She turned to walk away, clutching her golden ball, but the frog called out after her, "Wait. Remember your promise, Princess." At the sound of his voice, Hildegard's heart skipped a beat. She stopped and turned to look back at the pond, but the frog was already hopping toward the shore, his eyes bright with expectation. "Did you forget?" the frog asked, his voice soft yet firm. "You made a promise to me." Princess Hildegard hesitated. She thought about how strange it would be to keep a frog in the castle, but she also remembered her promise. She reluctantly walked back to the pond. "I'll keep my word," she said, "but I am not sure how this will work. You are a frog, and I am a princess. What will we do?" The frog did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked up at her with such understanding and wisdom in his eyes that it startled the princess. "Trust me," he said softly. "It will all work out as it should." With that, the frog hopped toward the princess's feet and looked up at her. Without further discussion, the princess picked him up gently in her hands and carried him back to the castle. The princess was surprised at how easy it was to carry the frog. He was not heavy at all, and there was something oddly comforting about his presence, though she could not quite explain why. As they walked through the castle halls, she noticed how everyone stared at her as she passed, holding the frog in her hands. When they arrived at the royal dining room, the princess placed the frog on the table. As she had promised, she gave him a small plate of food, but the frog merely stared at it. "I do not eat the same food as you," he said. The princess, feeling uncomfortable, sat down to eat her own meal. She felt a strange connection to the frog, but she couldn't understand why. After dinner, the frog requested to sleep in the princess's bed. As promised, though she felt awkward, she allowed him to sit on the pillow beside her, unsure of what would happen next. That night, as the princess lay in bed, something magical occurred. As the moonlight shone through the window, the frog began to glow softly, and before her eyes, he transformed. His green skin became smooth, his legs elongated, and he grew tall and handsome. The princess gasped in astonishment as she watched the frog change before her. "Why are you so upset, Princess?" the voice said. Startled, Princess Hildegard looked around, trying to see where the voice was coming from. To her amazement, a large, green frog emerged from the water, sitting on a lily pad. It looked at her with big, round eyes, and for a moment, Hildegard thought she might be imagining things. Who are you?" she asked, still unsure whether she should be frightened or not. "I am a frog," the creature replied with a deep croak. "I live in this pond. But I can help you with your problem, Princess." Hildegard frowned, wiping away a tear from her cheek. "Help me? How can you help me? My golden ball has fallen into the pond. And it's gone forever." The frog nodded wisely, its big eyes gleaming with a peculiar light. "I can retrieve your golden ball for you," it said. "But you must promise me something in return." The princess hesitated. The idea of making a deal with a frog seemed absurd. Yet the prospect of losing her beloved ball filled her with dread. "What do you want in return?" she asked cautiously. The frog croaked once more, its voice calm and firm. "I want you to promise that, when I return the ball to you, you will take me with you to your castle. You must let me sit at your table, eat from your plate, and sleep on your pillow. You must treat me as a companion, just as you would a prince." Princess Hildegard was taken aback by this strange request. She was a kind-hearted princess, but the thought of having a frog at her table seemed strange and unappealing. She thought for a moment, but the image of her golden ball sinking deeper into the dark waters made her quickly agree. "All right," she said. "I promise. If you return my ball, I will keep my word and let you come to the castle." The frog gave a satisfied croak. "Then I shall retrieve your ball." Without another word, the frog dove into the water, disappearing beneath the surface. The princess waited anxiously, pacing along the edge of the pond. After what seemed like an eternity, the frog resurfaced, holding her golden ball gently in its mouth. It hopped onto the lily pad and offered the ball to Hildegard. "Here it is, Princess," the frog said, its voice filled with pride. "As promised, I have returned your golden ball." Princess Hildegard was overjoyed. She reached out to take the ball, her eyes shining with delight. But as soon as she had it in her hands, she remembered her promise. The frog watched her with expectant eyes. "Well, Princess," it croaked, "what about your promise?" Hildegard looked down at the frog, and her heart filled with discomfort. She didn't want to take a frog into the castle, but she had given her word. She could not go back on her promise. With a sigh, she bent down and said, "All right. You may come with me to the castle." The frog smiled, though it was a strange smile, and said, "Thank you, Princess. Let us go." Hildegard felt uneasy as she picked up the golden ball and began walking back toward the castle. The frog hopped behind her, his large webbed feet making a soft splashing sound on the ground. She could hear him croaking happily as they approached the castle gate. As soon as they reached the castle, Hildegard opened the door and stepped inside. The frog, following closely behind, gave a satisfied croak. "I am ready for my reward, Princess." The princess led the frog to the dining hall, where the royal staff had just finished preparing dinner. Everyone in the castle was surprised to see the frog, and many of the servants gasped in shock. "What is this? One of them whispered. I promised the frog that it could stay with me, Hildegard explained, trying to sound as if it were all perfectly normal. With a bit of hesitation, the princess placed the frog on a cushion at her table. She seated herself across from him, not quite sure what to do. The frog, however, appeared perfectly content. It sat up straight and gave a satisfied croak, as though it had already been treated as a prince. Dinner was served, and to Hildegard's surprise, the frog ate his meal with great gusto. Though he was a frog, he seemed to have no trouble eating the fine food. He ate as if he were used to eating from a silver plate, and Hildegard couldn't help but feel a little uncomfortable at the oddity of the situation. When the meal was over, the frog looked at Hildegard and said, I am tired now, princess. It's time for me to sleep. The princess, though still uncertain, led the frog to a soft, silk-covered cushion beside her bed. She could not bear to let him sleep on her pillow, so she placed him on the floor instead. Good night, Mr. Frog, she whispered, feeling a strange mix of emotions. The frog gave a deep, contented croak, and Hildegard climbed into bed, trying her best to fall asleep. She lay awake for some time, listening to the quiet croaks of the frog as he settled down for the night. The next morning, when the princess woke up, she was startled to find that the frog was no longer lying on the floor. Instead, there was a young man lying beside her. His dark hair spread out on the pillow. He looked handsome and regal, dressed in fine clothes, and his eyes sparkled with a gentle, yet confident light. The princess blinked in surprise, rubbing her eyes to make sure she was not dreaming. The young man stirred and opened his eyes. When he saw Hildegard, he smiled warmly. Good morning, princess, he said in a voice that was smooth and melodious. Hildegard gasped. Who are you? She asked, still shocked by the sudden transformation. The young man sat up, his movements graceful and noble. I am the frog you met yesterday, he explained, his smile deepening. I was cursed by a wicked witch to live as a frog until someone truly kind and pure-hearted could see beyond my appearance and offer me their help. You, princess, fulfilled the terms of the curse by offering me your hospitality and kindness. As a result, I have been freed from the spell, and I am now free to live as I truly am, a prince. Hildegard could hardly believe her ears. The frog, now a handsome prince, had been cursed by a witch and had been waiting for someone like her to break the spell. Her heart swelled with happiness for him, and for herself as well. She had helped him. And now she understood why the frog had asked for such a strange promise. The prince stood up and bowed to her. Thank you, Princess Hildegard, for your kindness and for keeping your word. I am forever grateful. Hildegard smiled warmly and stood beside him. I am glad I could help you. But what will you do now, Prince? The prince took her hand gently. I would be honored if you would marry me, Princess. You have shown me the greatest kindness, and I would like to spend the rest of my life with you. The princess blushed, but her heart filled with joy. She had never met anyone like him before, and now she knew that true beauty comes from within. "Yes," she said softly, "I will marry you." And so, the princess and the prince were married in a grand ceremony that filled the entire kingdom with joy. The people celebrated their union, and they lived happily ever after.